The place on which we saw and we are filled with the light of you. To you, Therefore we glorify you as the Mother of God, as your Son, to forgive us. Rashine oti Theotokos Maria, Hail to you, O
Pray for the Holy Gospel.
Let God arise, let all his enemies be scattered. Let those also who hate his holy name plead before his face. Alleluia, alleluia, Isus, Isus, et oro et tempo, avantemur, pendiesmur, pendiceroe, masum
said the trailer, not the song. See the song, yeah.
Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, our Lord, God and Savior and King of us all, Jesus Christ, the Son of the living God, to whom is the glory due forever. Amen. Then Jesus spoke to them, saying again, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. The Pharisees therefore said to him, You bear witness of yourself. Your witness is not true. Then Jesus answered and said to them, Even if I bear witness of myself, my witness is true. For I know where I came from and where I am going, but you do not know where I come from and where I am going. You judge according to the flesh. I judge no one, and yet if I do judge, my judgment is true. For I am not alone, but I am with the Father who sent me. It is also written in your law that the testimony of two men is true. I am one who bears witness of myself, and the Father who sent me bears witness of me. Then they said to him, Where is your Father? Jesus answered, You know neither me nor my Father. If you had known me, you would have known my Father also. These words spoke Jesus. Jesus spoke in the treasury as he taught in the temple. And no one laid hands on him, for his hour had not yet come.
Glory be to God forever. Forgive us our trespasses, forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Who Christ Jesus our Lord, has been power and glory forever. Amen. Let us go so spend joy.
Das Kieferlassen te Kiriklinati,
Nom Deum so Kyrie.
Rosamente Metavuvamin,
Domnum Vate.
Everyone in our sins, Lord, save our lives and obey the solutions of God. Receive the Holy Spirit, if you forgive the sins of any of our forgive if you repent the sins of any of our king. Those who are our blessed, we stood up also for those who use the church, for your sins upon the earth, the tourism bind of the one, and we grant continue to us, Lord, save us, our Father, that blessed in our leadings. Those who bow their heads before before we will dispense thoughts your mercy. Those who want all sin and corruption, anything against you, knowing and unknowing, it's for ambush and heart, Lord, you, Lord, worship and helpfulness. The nice of all the weakness of men, as good and lovable and help us the forgiveness of our sins, bless us. We require us that Lord will speak us with your fear. Speak to us, Lord, we will those in the Holy Spirit, we will like now, Lord, with us, our Father, in Jesus' name. Christ, our Lord, dear Christus, good night to you. O King of Kings, grant us your peace, establish for us your peace, and forgive us our sins. We'll stop here now, then we are very blessed to have Archimar with us. He will give us a sermon. I know some people have a commitment, they have to leave. So we're very happy to have you, Archie, in the Feast of St. Monica. The first time we'll officially celebrate it, so you are the beginning of the celebration. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen.
I'd like to thank you for inviting me out. First of all, I want to congratulate all of you on the church and getting Abuna Bulis. He's a great priest and a great blessing to all of you. So I want to congratulate the congregation, and it's wonderful to see so many kids, more kids than adults almost, which is very nice. It was nice to be asked to come speak about St. Monica because, to be honest, I'd never read her life. So I didn't know anything about her other than she was St. Augustine's mom. And so this was a blessing for me because I got to learn a lot about St. Monica. I didn't know very much about her. So I want to summarize her life for you in one quick paragraph. St. Monica was the model Catholic mom. She was born into a Christian family in Tunisia in the early part of the 4th century, right after Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity. So her husband, Patricius, was a pagan. Their son, Augustine, St. Augustine, proved to be quite a challenge, I'm sure most of you know, as passed through his adolescence and early adult years, living with his girlfriend, getting involved in an exotic cult, and all throughout Monica labored in prayer for his conversion. Her prayers were finally answered, and her son became a bishop and one of the great teachers in the history of the church. So this is St. Monica's life. And I believe that it wasn't just her prayers, but it was also her example of how she lived that really converted so many people. So there's a passage from 1 Peter that I want to read to you, and it's something we should all think about. Likewise, you wives, be submissive to your husbands. And this verse just captures St. Monica perfectly. Likewise, you wives, be submissive to your husbands, so that some, though they do not obey the word, may be won over without a word by the behavior of their wives. When they see your reverent and chaste behavior, let not yours be the outward adorning with braiding of hair, decoration of gold, and wearing of robes, but let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable jewel of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. It's almost like this verse predicts and describes St. Monica's life in one shot. So tonight I want to talk about how she lived out this verse. And I want to focus on her marriage before St. Augustine. And I almost don't want to talk about St. Augustine tonight. I want to talk about her, and I want to talk about her husband, and I want to talk about her mother-in-law. So we're not really going to talk about St. Augustine. That'll be another time. I'm sure Abuna will talk about that. So please forgive me. So I'm going to read some quotes from a book that I found that's really nice. It's The Life of St. Monica by someone named Frances Alice Forbes. And I just want to read you, I'm going to read you bits and pieces of the book, so just bear with me. Sorry, make sound. So this book is above all the story of a mother, but it also the story of a noble woman. A woman who is truly great, for this reason that she never sought to be so, because she understood the sphere in which a woman's work in the world must usually lie, and led her life truly along the lines that God had laid down for her, because she suffered bravely, forgot herself for others, and remained faithful to her noble ideas. She ruled as a queen amongst those whom her life was cast. Her influence was great and far-reaching, but she herself was the last to suspect it. She never once thought her life would be far-reaching, the last to desire it, and that was perhaps the secret of her greatness. That this type is rare in the present day, but thank God, there are Monicas still in the world. If there were more, the world would be a better place. And I just love that quote. And it's nice to see all the moms here, because it really is the moms who are the backbone of the church. And it's their silent strength and beauty that really holds up the household in so many ways. So I want to tell you about her marriage. When she was 22 years old, her parents gave her away to be married, and they gave her to a pagan, which was an unusual thing to do. He was a citizen of Tarsus. His name was Patricius. He held a good position in the town because he belonged to a noble family, but he was poor. Monica knew very little of her future husband, but just that he was nearly twice her age. So he was 40, and a pagan. And it was the custom for parents to arrange all the matters, and that she only had to obey. So that was her job. There was a lot of surprise by the people of the city that such a good Christian should choose a pagan husband for their beautiful daughter, especially since Patricius was well known for his violent temper, even among his own people. So this guy was a pagan, and he was known for being an angry pagan. She had her girlish ideas of love and marriage, as all girls do. She had dreamt of a strong arm on which she could lean, of a heart and soul that would be at one with her in all that was the most important to her, of 2 lives spent together in God's love and service. And now it seemed, this was her dream, and now it seemed that she was the one who had to be strong for both of them, to strive and to suffer to bring her husband's soul out of darkness into the truth of light. She finally came to grips with this. This is her destiny. She was never meant to marry the man of her dreams, but she got this guy. And late one night, after spending much time at the church, kneeling at her bed, she laid the ideas of her girlish dreams at the feet of the Lord and called it her sacrifice, however small, and it would go rewarded. She would be true to this new trust. She resolved, whatever the cost. So she picked a moment and she said, I'm not going to have this husband. This is the husband I'm getting, not the one I imagined. And she laid it on the altar in front of Christ. Things certainly did not go well for the young bride's happiness. Patricius lived with his mother. So now we have a second problem. A woman of strong passion like himself, and devoted to her son. So everyone see what's happening? He lives with his mom. His mom is a very strong woman, and she loves her son a lot. She was very jealous of the young girl who stole his affection from her, and made up her mind to dislike her. Sound familiar? Of course, the slaves of the household, this never happens today, the slaves of the household followed her lead and tried to please the mother by inventing stories against Monica. So they could tell that the mother-in-law didn't like Monica, so they would just make up stories. Patricius, who loved his young wife with the only kind of love he was capable of, he had nothing in common with her and had no clue to her thoughts or actions. He had neither reverence nor respect for women. He didn't respect women. And I'm reading between the lines because there's kids here, but he loved his wife with the only kind of love he knew how. He was a pagan, and they committed all kinds of acts in their kinds of worship. He had neither respect for women. Indeed, most of the women he knew were deserving of neither. And he had chosen Monica because she was pretty, but much as he would have chosen a horse or a dog. So to her, she was just pretty, and that's why he picked her. He thought her ways were strange. She took kindly an interest in the slaves. She liked the slaves, as if they had been her own flesh and blood, and would even intercede to spare them a beating before they would get hit. She liked the poor, and would gather these dirty and unpleasant people around her, going so far even as to wash and dress their sores. Sores are like their wounds. Patricius did not share her attraction and objected strongly to such happenings. But Monica pleaded so humbly and so sweetly that he gave way and let her do what seemed to cause her so much pleasure. He said there was no accounting for taste. People do whatever they want. He remarked she would spend hours in the church praying with her eyes fixed on the altar. True, she was never there at a time when she was likely to be missed by her husband. Important. She would go to the church for hours, but she never went when her husband would miss her. And never was she so full of tender affection for him as when she came home from church. But still, it was a strange way of spending one's time, and he didn't really understand. And the question we ask is how do we use the church? Monica would go to the church like it was a well, and she'd go and she'd drink, and she would be filled, and then she would come back and take that love that she got from church and spread it to her husband, to the slaves, to the mother-in-law. And I think this is the first important lesson that I want to stop and comment on about Saint Monica and about how we use the church. Sometimes we think we're meant to be, Christ asks us to be light of the world, which is not in here. And sometimes we want to be light at church, not light of the world. And so we come to the church and we light, and then we go outside the church and we're the same. And she was the opposite. She would come in the church and she would drink and take, and then she would be the light of the world outside of the church. When Patricius was in one of his violent tempers, he was angry, he was shouting, abusing, and even striking everyone who came his way. She would look at him with gentle eyes that showed neither fear nor anger, but love. She never answered him sharply, even though his rude words wounded her cruelly. He once raised his hand to strike her, but he didn't dare. Something, and he did not know what, held him back from hitting her. Later, when his anger would subside, and he was perhaps a little ashamed of his violence, she would meet him with an affectionate smile, forgiving and forgetting everything he did. She rarely explained her own self, her own conduct. More often, she said nothing, knowing that actions speak more loudly than words. As her greatest biographer said of her, she spoke little, preached not at all, loved much, and prayed unceasingly. And if that could be the summary of our lives, that would be fantastic. If I was known as the guy who spoke little, preached not at all, loved much, and prayed unceasingly. I hope we can all aim for this. And the question we ask is, I wonder if she had given him a sermon when he was angry after he had calmed down, if that would have been as effective. And the answer is no. He would have just been angrier. But she didn't give a sermon. She preached a sermon with her actions. She loved, she forgave, she forgot, and she hugged him, and she moved on. And that kind of grace is what saves families. That kind of grace is what holds the family together. That kind of love. When the young wives of her acquaintance, married like herself to pagan husbands, complained of the insults and even blows that they had to bear. So the wives would get together who were married to the pagans, and they'd sit in a circle and they'd complain. She would say, "Are you sure your own tongue is not to blame?" She would ask them laughingly, but she meant it. And then with ready sympathy would do all she could to help and comfort and advise them. They would ask her secrets, for everyone knew that in spite of the violence of Patricius's temper, he treated her with something that almost approached respect. So he didn't respect anyone but her. And they would ask her, "What's your secret? How do you do it?" Then she would bid them be patient, love and pray, and meet harshness with gentleness, meet abuse with silence. And when they sometimes answered that it would seem weak to knock under in such a fashion, Monica would ask them, "Do you think more strength is needed to speak or to be silent when you're provoked? And which is easier, to smile or to sulk when insulted?" Many homes were happier in consequence, for Monica had a particular gift for making peace. So Monica would use the abuse that she got from her husband as a source to give comfort to all these other women who were abused in their own marriages. So it turns out that something bad, and I'm going to put bad in quotes, created strength in her that she shared with others. So God planted a seed of pain inside her that sprouted forth strength for other people. And so it's amazing that sometimes we look at the thing that God gave us. In this case, God gave her this terrible husband, and we think it's bad. And the first thing we ask for is we say, "God, get rid of the bad thing." But that's not the bad thing. That's on purpose. That was placed there to give her strength, to give her holiness, to give her patience, so that she could then sprout it and be somewhere else. To the outside world, Patricius's young wife seemed content and happy. She managed her affairs well, people said, and no one but God knew of the suffering that was the secret of her. So to everyone else, they thought she was happy. She never let on that she was miserable. And I compare this to nowadays when we see everyone complaining about their circumstances and why is God doing this to me and why is this happening to me? And yet she, abused 22-year-old wife, seemed happy to the outside world. And the question is she being fake? Is she pretending to be happy? Is she pretending to cover up for her husband? Or is she honoring and protecting her husband? She could very easily talk bad about him. She could very easily tell the world how he's abusive, how he's angry, how he's controlling, and get all kinds of sympathy and attention for herself. But she chose not to do that. She chose to protect him and honor him as her husband, even though she could have smeared his reputation, smeared his name in the town. Does he deserve this protection? Does he deserve to be honored like that by this woman? Do we deserve anything we get from God? Did we deserve anything that Christ gave us? But yet God gives freely. So Monica, taking this image of Christ, gives, even though he didn't deserve it. And the question is, does anyone ever deserve it? Do any of us deserve it? And when we're honest with ourselves, we know what the answer is, and then we know what we need to do with others. With Monica, he was always at his best, but he grew tired of being at his best. It was so much easier to be at his worst. He gradually began to seek distraction among his old pagan companions in his old sinful pleasures. There's children here, so I'm going to let you figure out what that means. He started going back to his old pagan companions and seeking the old pagan pleasures, the sinful ones. The whole town began to talk about it, talk of his neglect of his beautiful young wife. And Monica, of course, suffered. Everyone knew what he was doing. She suffered cruelly, but she did it in silence. When he was at home, which was very seldom, she was serene and gentle as usual. She never reproached him, she never yelled at him, and she treated him with the same tender respect as always, despite knowing what he was doing and him being gone all the time doing it. So everyone in the town knows she's embarrassed, she's humiliated, but when he comes home, she would offer him charm and a smile. Maybe this is where the church gives the advice to the new brides. Does anyone know the advice that I'm thinking of? Right? Don't frown in his face, regardless. And of course everyone laughs. And every husband looks at his wife. So I want to note that we still haven't even gotten to Augustine yet. All right? That's the next cross that's coming. And so I wonder if maybe this cross was the first cross that was sent to her to prepare her for the next cross. And so sometimes God gives us the first cross, and he strengthens us, and he deepens our relationship with him. And that cross is only there because the real cross is coming later. And to us, we're like, this is bad. I need to pray for this bad thing to go away. And God's like, no. This was planned from the beginning of time. This was the plan. This was the cross, because you have another cross, Augustine. And everything you're going to learn from your husband is going to teach you and help you deal with your son, who's a real problem. So let's talk about her mother-in-law, then we can end. Hama. Her mother-in-law treated her with suspicion and dislike. She didn't trust her. You see, all the slaves constantly invented fresh stories against her. They lied about her actions to the mother-in-law. Here's what is amazing. From the outside, Monica did not even seem to notice unkindness, repaying the many insults she received from the mother and the slaves with tact, tactfully received. So she took all of these insults with love. But of course she felt it very deeply. She would say, they do not know. And that's how she protected them. And pray for all of them earnestly, offering her suffering for these poor souls who were so far from the peace of Christ. How was the light of Christ to come to them except through her? How could they learn to love Christ unless they learned to love his servants and to see Christ in them? The revelation of God must come through her, and she knew this. She knew that the only chance that these pagans had, whether it be the mother-in-law or the slaves, was her. Thou in me, O Lord, she would pray. She would often say, thou in me, you are in me, O Lord, and draw strength and courage at his feet for her daily suffering. Monica, it is true, was a saint, but a saint in the making. Saints are not born saints. Holiness is a beautiful thing that is built up stone by stone. Sometimes we think these saints they would pray and everything would be great and God was with them, but he's not really with us. It's not like that. These saints were made piece by piece, not brought into being by the touch of a wizard's wand. During the years that had passed since Patricius had brought his young wife home to her, she would have been the first to confess how far she had fallen short of the idea she had set for herself. St. Monica never believed she was any good. And yet there was ceaseless effort, ceaseless prayer, unwearying love and patience. Outwardly all seemed as usual, but the hidden force had been doing its work in secret. She had been loving, and God was working. The mother of Patricius was growing old, so her mother-in-law finally started to pass. She was not so active anymore or as strong, but what had used to have been easy for her was becoming difficult. It hurt her independence to ask others for help. Monica, reading her heart, as if only the unselfish can, saw this and understood. At every moment, this older woman, the mother-in-law, would find that some little service had been done by unseen hands, some little thoughtful act that made things easy for the tired old limbs. There was someone who seemed to know and understand what the mother almost wanted, almost before she did herself. Who could it be? It's not the slaves. Certainly, they only did their job because they were afraid to be beaten. That was not it, nor was it Patricius, her son. It was not his way. He never thought of anyone but himself. So she realized it had to be Monica. And so as she was getting older, she realized that things were done in the house in a certain way, that the way only someone who really understood her would do it. And she did it in secret. And she made it easy for the mother-in-law. Things that she could no longer do, and just give her just enough help. And the mother-in-law started thinking, who's doing this? Who's putting all these things in the house in such a way that are perfect for me? It's not the slaves. It can't be my son. It's got to be Monica. And then she started realizing, maybe I've got Monica all wrong. Remember, she really hated Monica. She didn't just kind of hate Monica. She really believed Monica was evil. Something didn't make sense to the mother-in-law, so she sent for the slaves. She questioned them sharply as to the stories they told about Monica. They faltered, they contradicted themselves, they contradicted each other, and next thing you know, they confessed that they had lied and made up the whole thing. The hidden forces had been working there too, with the slaves. Monica's kindness, her sympathy with their joys and sorrows, had already touched their hearts, the slaves, and they readily confessed that they had made up all this stuff. More than once, they had been sorry for ever having spoken evil against her, and they felt ashamed in her presence. The mother-in-law punished the slaves that lied and invented stories about Monica. Justice had been done on the slaves. The mother of Patricius sought out her daughter-in-law. She sought out Monica, told her frankly that she was wrong, and asked for her forgiveness. So after years and years of persecuting Monica, she asked her to forgive her. Monica grabbed the old woman in her arms and refused to listen. She wouldn't let her finish her sentence, much like I imagine the father in the parable of the prodigal son. From that moment, they were the best of friends. The mother wanted to know the secret of Monica. How did you do it? And she asked her. So Monica shared. It was a message of life, of hope beyond the grave, of joy, of peace. The mother begged to be received as a Christian. She begged to be a Christian. No sermons, no talks, no lectures, just action. It was not long before she knelt at Monica's side before the altar and received holy baptism. One by one, the slaves also followed the mother's example, hungry for the message that brought such peace and light. They too asked Monica, and she again shared, and they too became Christian. So all of the slaves in the house and the mother-in-law all became Christian. Everyone Christian except her husband, Patricius. And even he was growing gentle every day, a little bit more thoughtful. The forces were working at him as well. His love for Monica was more reverent. His eyes were opening slowly to the beauty of spiritual things he never understood before. His mother was failing fast, and the end could not be far off. Monica devoted herself day and night, heart and soul, to serve this old woman before she died. And this woman clung to her with tender affection and was never happy when Monica wasn't there. Eventually, she passed in peace with Monica by her side, showing her love until the very end. I don't know, should I stop? It's going long. I'll get to the punchline. You want me to keep going, Mish? So Monica's happiness for the mother was short-lived. She was very happy when the mother went to heaven, because Patricius would soon join her. He started getting very sick. He didn't deceive himself. He spoke to his wife about his coming death, and he too asked, like a baby, to be baptized. Eventually, he too became baptized, and once more he asked her to forgive him for all the pain he had caused her and all that made her suffer. He told her that she must not grieve, that parting would only be for a little while, but the meeting for all of eternity. She had been his angel, he said. He owed all his joy to her. It was her love, her patience that had done it all. She had shown him the beauty of goodness and made him love it. He thanked her for all that she had been to him, all that she had shown him, and all that she had done for him. Her tears fell on his face. Her loving arms supported him. Her sweet voice, broken with weeping, spoke words of hope and comfort. What's amazing here is that she cried for him, which is amazing because he had abused her his whole life. And yet at the very end, she cries for him, a man who had abused her, cheated on her, and was cruel to her. So I'll end with this one quote. This is something she said to Augustine. So I'll talk about Augustine very quickly. Son, as far as I'm concerned, nothing in this life now gives me any pleasure. I do not know why I'm still here, since I have no further hope in the world. This is her attitude. I don't even know why I'm in the world. Nothing in the world gives me pleasure. I did have one reason for wanting to live a little longer, to see you become a Christian before I died. God has lavished his gifts on me in that way, for I know you have now renounced earthly happiness to be his servant, so what am I doing here? That's what she would say to Augustine. And glory be to God forever.
Hear us, O Lord, when we call upon your thanks, our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom. Just as you have been, give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespass, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one through Christ Jesus, our Lord, and the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. May the Lord God, the Father, grace only begotten Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, the gift of the Holy Spirit, be with you all. Whoever wants to go in peace and peace with you all. Amen.